the Florentine Codex. Book 12, The Conquest of Mexico. An English translation of Fray Bernardino de Sahagun's Spanish column. Source: Fray Bernardino de Sahagún, Historia General de las Cosas de Nueva España, General History of the Things of New Spain, Book 12, compiled with Nahuatl collaborators at the Colegio de Santa Cruz de Tlatelolco, circa 1553 to 1577. Original manuscript, Biblioteca Medicea Laurentiana, Florence, manuscript Med Palat 220. What this is: each folio of the original has 2 columns. The Nahuatl testimony of Nahuatl elders on the right, and Sahagun's own Spanish version on the left. This document translates the Spanish column only. That column is Sahagun's paraphrase of the Nahuatl. It is often shorter than, and occasionally softens or reframes the Nahuatl account beside it. So what follows faithfully renders Sahagun's Spanish, not the raw Nahuatl voice. Where the two diverge is itself of historical interest, and would require working from the Nahuatl column. Method and sources. The Spanish text was taken from the diplomatic transcription of the manuscript's Spanish column, published by the early Nahuatl Library, enl.wired-humanities.org, edited by James Lockhart. The English here is a fresh translation of that public domain 16th century Spanish made for this document. It is not a reproduction of any existing published translation. Folio numbers, F1R, etc., follow the manuscript's own foliation. Nahuatl names and terms are given in Sahagun's spellings, lightly regularized, e.g. Moctezuma for Moctezuma. Chapter 1. Of the signs and omens that appeared before the Spaniards came to this land, or had been heard of. 10 years before the Spaniards came to this land, there appeared in the sky a marvelous and frightful thing. There appeared a flame of fire, very large and very brilliant. It seemed to be stretched across the sky itself. It was wide at the lower part and pointed at the upper part. When the fire burned, the point of it seemed to reach the middle of the sky. It would rise in the east just after midnight, and it came out with such brilliance that it seemed like day. It lasted until morning, and then it was lost from view. When the sun rose, the flame was in the place where the sun stands at midday. This lasted for the space of a year, every night. It began in the year 12 house, and when it appeared at midnight, all the people cried out and were terrified. Everyone suspected that it was a sign of some great evil. The second sign that occurred was that the pinnacle of a temple, Q of Huitzilopochtli, which was called Tlaxcala, took fire miraculously and burned. It seemed that the flames of the fire came from within the timbers of the columns, and very quickly it turned to ash. As it burned, the temple attendants, satraps, began to cry out, saying, "O Mexicans, come quickly to put out the fire with jars of water." And when the water came, they threw it on the fire, but it did not go out. Rather, it flamed up all the more, and so it was all reduced to embers. The third sign or omen was that a bolt of lightning fell upon the temple of Huitzilopochtli, god of fire, which was roofed with straw. It was called Smallpox. They were astonished by this, because it was not raining, only a fine drizzle, the kind of rain during which lightning does not usually strike, nor was there any thunderclap, so that they did not know how it caught fire. The fourth sign or omen was that in daylight, while the sun was shining, a comet fell. There appeared 3 stars together running abreast, very bright, bearing very long tails. They set out from toward the west and ran toward the east, throwing off sparks as they went. When the people saw them, they began a great outcry. A tremendous noise sounded throughout the whole region. The fifth sign, or omen, was that the Lake of Mexico rose up with great waves. It seemed to boil, without any wind blowing, the lake which never rises without a strong wind. The waves reached very far and came in among the houses. Some houses fell. Great was the terror of all to see that without any wind the water had grown so violent. The sixth sign or omen is that at night a woman's voice was heard in the air saying, "O my children, now we are lost." And sometimes it said, "O my children, where shall I take you?" The seventh sign or omen is that the hunters of the water birds caught an ash-colored bird, the size of a crane, and then went to show it to Moctezuma, who was in a hall they called Tlatelolco. It was past midday. This bird had, in the middle of its head, a round mirror in which the sky could be seen, and the stars, especially the fire drill, the Mas de Lejos, near the Pleiades. When Moctezuma saw this, he was terrified. And the second time he looked into the mirror that the bird bore, a little later, he saw a multitude of people coming, all together, armed and mounted on horses. Then Moctezuma ordered the augurs and diviners to be summoned, and he asked them, "Do you not know what this is that I have seen? For a great many people are coming together." But before the diviners could answer, the bird vanished, and they answered nothing. The eighth sign, or omen, is that many times monstrous beings appeared, in monstrous bodies. They would bring them to Moctezuma, and when he saw them in his chamber, which was called Tlatelolco, they would at once disappear. Chapter 2. Of the first ships that reached this land, which according to what they say was the expedition of Juan de Grijalva. The first time that ships appeared on the coast of this New Spain, Moctezuma's captains, who were called Calpixques, and were stationed near the coast, went at once to see what it was that was coming, for they had never seen ships. One of them was the Calpixque of Quextlan, who was named Pinotl. He took with him other Calpixques, one of whom was named Yaotzin, who resided in the town of Mictlancuautla, and another named Teocalhueyacan, who resided in the town of Teocalhueyacan, and another named Huitzilopochtli. This last was not a Calpixque, but the servant of one of those Calpixques and a minor leader, along with another minor leader named Tentil. These five went to see what that thing was, and they took along some goods under the pretext of selling them, in order to see what manner of thing it was. They took some rich cloaks that only Moctezuma used and no one else had license to wear. They embarked in some canoes and went to the ships, saying among themselves, "We are here as guardians of this coast. It is fitting that we know for certain what this is, so that we can carry the true news to Moctezuma." They then got into the canoes and began to row toward the ships. And when they came up alongside the ships and saw the Spaniards, they all kissed the prows of the canoes as a sign of worship, for they thought it was the god Quetzalcoatl returning, whom they were and are awaiting, as appears in the history of that god. Then the Spaniards spoke to them, saying, "Who are you? Where do you come from? Where are you from?" Those who were in the canoes answered, "We have come from Mexico." The Spaniards said to them, "If it is true that you are Mexicans, tell us, what is the name of the Lord of Mexico?" They answered them, "Our lords, the Lord of Mexico, is named Moctezuma." And then they presented to them everything they carried. Of those rich cloaks they carried, some were called Xiuhtlalpili, others Tecomayo, others Sahualquauhio, others Ecacoscayo, others Tolechio or Amalacayo, others Tezcapochio. All these kinds of cloaks they presented to the one who went as chief in those ships, who according to what they say was Grijalva. And the Spaniards gave the Indians glass beads, some green and others yellow. And when the Indians saw them, they marveled greatly and prized them highly. And they took leave of the Indians, saying, "Now we are returning to Castile, but soon we will come back and go to Mexico." The Indians returned to land, and then they set out for Mexico, where they arrived in a day and a night to bring the news to Moctezuma of what they had seen. And they brought him the beads that the Spaniards had given them. And they spoke to him in this way, "Our Lord, we deserve death. Hear what we have seen and what we have done. You set us as guardians at the seashore. We have seen certain gods out in the sea, and we went to receive them and gave them your rich cloaks. And you see here what they gave us, these beads. And they told us, 'If it is true that you are Mexicans, here are these beads. Give them to Moctezuma so that he will know us.' And they told him everything that had happened when they were with them in the ships on the sea. Moctezuma answered them, saying, 'You come tired and worn out. Go and rest. I have received this in secret, and I command you to say nothing to anyone about what has happened.'" Chapter 3. Of what Moctezuma decreed after he heard the account of those who saw the first ships. When Moctezuma had heard the news from those who came from the sea, he immediately had summoned the highest ranking of them, who was named Tlaxcala, and the others who had come with the message, and he ordered them to place guards and lookouts in all the settlements along the sea coast. One is called Nahuatl, another Mictlancuautla, so that they might watch for when those ships should return, and then report on it at once. With this the Calpixks, or captains, departed, and immediately ordered that lookouts be posted in the said settlements. And Moctezuma then gathered his leading men. One was called Tzaihuacoatl, Tlilpotonki, another Tlacoxcalcatl, Quapiestzin, another Taicatiahuacatl, Quetzalaztatzin, another Huitznahuatlilotlak, and another Ecatempatiltzin. To all these he communicated the news that had arrived, and he showed them the glass beads that the messengers had brought, and he told them, "These seem to me to be precious stones. Let them be well guarded in the treasury. Let none be lost. And if any is lost, those who have charge of guarding the treasury shall pay for it." A year from that time, in the year 13 Rabbit, those who were at the lookout saw ships on the sea, and at once came in great haste to give word to Moctezuma. When Moctezuma heard the news, he immediately dispatched people for the reception of Quetzalcoatl, because he thought it was he who was coming, for they were awaiting him every day, and because they had accounts that Quetzalcoatl had gone off by sea toward the east, and the ships came from the direction of the east. They thought it was he. Moctezuma sent 5 leaders to receive him, and to present to him a great gift that he sent him. The highest ranking of those who went was named Yohuali Achan, the second Tepoztecatl, the third Techahua, the fourth Huehuetecatl, and the fifth Huecamecatl Eka. Chapter 4. Of what Moctezuma decreed when he found out that the Spaniards had returned a second time. This was Don Hernando Cortes. Moctezuma spoke to the above-mentioned men, telling them, "Listen, I have been told that our Lord Quetzalcoatl has arrived. Go to receive him, and listen with great care to what he may say to you. See to it that you forget nothing that he tells you. You see here these jewels that you are to present to him on my behalf, which are all the priestly accoutrements proper to him." First, a mask worked in turquoise mosaic. This mask had worked in the same stone, a serpent doubled upon itself and twisted, the fold of which formed the ridge of the nose, and the twisted part ran up as far as the forehead and was like the bridge of the nose. Then the tail and the head parted from each other. The head, with part of the body, passed over one eye in such a way that it formed an eyebrow, and the tail, with part of the body, passed over the other eye and formed another eyebrow. This mask was set into a tall, large crown, full of rich, long, and very beautiful plumes, so that when one placed the crown upon one's head, one also placed the mask upon one's face. It bore as an ornament a round, wide medallion of gold, fastened with 9 strings of precious stones, which, when placed at the neck, covered the shoulders and the whole chest. They also took a large, round shield, embroidered with precious stones, with some bands of gold that reached across the whole of it from top to bottom, and other bands of pearls crossing over those of gold from top to bottom over the whole of it. And in the spaces made by these bands, which were like the meshes of a net, were set little golden toads. This shield had a fringe below, and attached to the shield was a banner that projected from the shield's grip, made of rich plumes. He also bore a large medallion made of mosaic work, which he wore tied and girded at the small of the back. They also took some strings of precious stones, with some small golden bells set among the stones to be tied at the ankles. They also took a scepter, like a bishop's crozier, all worked in turquoise mosaic, and the curve at the top was the head of a serpent, twisted or coiled. They also took some sandals, such as the great lords are accustomed to wear. Second, they also took the ornaments or accoutrements with which Tezcatlipoca was arrayed, which was a headpiece made of rich feathers that hung down behind nearly to the waist, all sprinkled with golden stars. They also took some golden earplugs, from which hung some little golden bells, and strings of small, beautiful white seashells. From these strings hung a hide that was like a breastplate. They wore it fastened in such a way that it covered the whole chest down to the waist. This breastplate bore many little seashells scattered and hung all over it. They also took a corselet of white cloth. painted. The lower edge of this corselet was embroidered with 3 bands of white feathers going all around. They took a rich cloak, the cloth of which was a light blue, all worked above with many designs of a very fine blue. This cloak was called a tzitzili. This cloak was placed at the waist, tied by its corners to the body. Over this cloak went a mosaic medallion, tied to the body at the small of the back. They also took some strings of little golden bells to be tied at the ankles, and also some white sandals such as the lords used to wear. They also took the accoutrements and ornaments of the god whom they called Teocalhueyacan, which was a mask with its plumage, like the one described above, with a banner like the one described above, also some wide earplugs of green stone, Chalchihuitl, which held inside some little serpents of green stone, and also a corselet painted with green designs, and some strings of precious stones, or a necklace with a medallion of precious stones. And they also took a medallion with which the small of the back was girded, like the one described above, with a rich cloak with which to gird oneself, as described above, and golden bells to put at the feet, and his staff like the one above. Other ornaments, which they said likewise belonged to Quetzalcoatl, a mitre of jaguar skin, and from the mitre hung, over the shoulders, a large hood made of crow feathers. The mitre bore a large round green stone at its tip. Also some round earplugs of turquoise mosaic, with a golden hook that came out from the earplug. They also took a gold necklace, from which hung a gold medallion that they call an ekakazcatl, and a rich cloak with which to gird oneself, and some little golden bells for the feet, and a round shield that had in the middle a round plate of gold. This shield was embroidered with rich plumes. From the lower part of the shield projected a band of rich plumes in the fashion described above. They took a staff worked in turquoise mosaic, and in the curve at the top were set some rich stones, or eminent pearls, at the very highest part. They also took some sandals, such as the lords used to wear. The messengers took all these things and presented them, according to what they say, to Don Hernando Cortes. They presented to him many other things not written here, such as a golden mitre made in the fashion of a seashell, with fringes of rich plumes that hung down toward the shoulders, and another plain mitre also of gold, and other gold jewels not written down. They put all these things in their containers, petases, and having taken leave of Moctezuma, he told them, "Go with haste and do not delay, and in my name worship the God who is coming, and tell him, your servant Moctezuma has sent us here. These things that we bring here, he sends to you, for you have come to your home, which is Mexico." The messengers then took to the road, and reached the shore of the sea, and there they entered canoes, and reached a place called Xicalanco. From there they again entered into other canoes, with all their gear, and reached the ships. Then they were asked from the ships, "Who are you? Where have you come from?" Those in the canoe said, "We come from Mexico." Those of the ship said, "Perhaps you are not from Mexico. Perhaps you falsely say that you are from Mexico and are deceiving us." And they went back and forth over this, and when the one side had satisfied the other, they drew the canoe alongside the ship and let down a ladder for them, by which they climbed up into the ship where Don Hernando Cortes was. Chapter 5. Of what happened when Moctezuma's messengers entered the ship of Captain Don Hernando Cortes. They began to climb up into the ship by the ladder, carrying the present that Moctezuma had ordered them to take. When they were before Don Hernando Cortes, they all kissed the ground in his presence and spoke to him in the following manner. "May the God, whom we come to worship in person, know from his servant Moctezuma, who rules and governs his city of Mexico for him, that he says the God has arrived after a hard journey." And then they took out the ornaments that they carried and put them upon Captain Don Hernando Cortes, arraying him with them. First they placed on him the crown and mask described above, and then all the rest. They put around his neck the necklaces of stones with the golden ornaments. On his left arm they placed the shield described above, and all the other things they set before him, laid out as they are accustomed to lay out their presents. The captain said to them, "Is there anything more than this?" They told him, "Our Lord, we have brought no more than these things that are here." Then the captain ordered them to be bound, and he ordered the artillery pieces to be fired. And the messengers, who were bound hand and foot when they heard the thunder of the cannon, fell to the ground as if dead. And the Spaniards raised them from the ground, and gave them wine to drink, with which they revived them, and they came to themselves. After this, Captain Don Hernando Cortes told them through his interpreter, "Hear what I say to you. I have been told that the Mexicans are valiant men, that they are great battlers and fighters, very skilled with weapons. They tell me that a single Mexican is enough to overcome 10 or 20 of his enemies. I want to test you to see if this is true, if you are as strong as I have been told." Then he ordered that they be given swords and shields to fight with an equal number of Spaniards, to see who would overcome the others. And the Mexicans then said to Captain Don Hernando Cortes, "May your grace hear our excuse as to why we cannot do what you command us, and it is that Moctezuma our lord sent us for nothing else but to greet you, and to give you this present. We cannot do anything else, nor can we do what you command us. And if we should do it, our lord Moctezuma would be greatly angered, and would order us killed." And the captain answered them, "It is to be done in any case what I tell you. I must see what kind of men you are, for there in our land we have heard that you are valiant men. Equip yourselves with these weapons, and prepare yourselves, so that tomorrow, first thing in the morning, we will meet on the field." Chapter 6. Of how Moctezuma's messengers returned to Mexico with an account of what they had seen. When what has been said was done, they at once took leave of the captain and went down into their canoes, and immediately began to make their way landward, paddling with great haste, and saying to one another, "Come, brave men, put your strength into the paddling before something happens to us." Paddling, they very soon reached the town of Tlatelolco. There they ate and rested only a very little. And then they again entered the canoes, and, paddling with great haste, reached the town called Teocalhueyacan. From there they began to travel by land, running with great haste, and reached the town called Tlaxcala. There they ate and rested a little. The people of the town begged them to rest at least a day, but they answered that they could not, because they were going in great haste to make known to Moctezuma what they had seen, very new things, never seen or heard, which they could tell to no one else. And traveling with great haste night and day, they reached Mexico by night. In the time that these messengers went and returned, Moctezuma was unable to eat or sleep, nor did he do anything willingly, but was very sad. He sighed frequently and was in great anguish. No pastime gave him pleasure, nothing made him content, and he said, "What is to become of us? Who must suffer these travails? No one but I, since I am lord and king, and have charge of everyone." His heart, it seemed, was being washed in chilly water, and so he was in great torment. And he said, "O Lord, where am I to go? How am I to escape?" When the messengers came to where Moctezuma's guard was, they told them, "Even if our lord Moctezuma is sleeping, wake him, and tell him that we have come from the seashore, where he sent us." Then the guards told him this, and he answered, "I do not wish to hear here the news they bring. I wish to go to the hall. There they shall speak to me. Let them go there." And then he ordered that the whole bodies of certain captives be anointed with chalk to be sacrificed. The messengers went to the hall, and Moctezuma went there too. And there, before the messengers, they killed the captives and sprinkled the messengers with the blood of the captives. They performed this ceremony because the messengers had seen great things. They had seen the gods and had spoken with them. Chapter 7. Of the account that the messengers who returned from the ships gave to Moctezuma. When what is said above had been done, they gave Moctezuma an account of everything they had seen and heard, and told of the food that the Spaniards ate, and of the weapons they used, and of everything that happened to them with the Spaniards. When Moctezuma had heard the account that his ambassadors gave him, he was greatly shocked and began to be afraid. He marveled at the Spaniards' food, and at hearing about the business of the artillery, especially the thunderous reports that burst the eardrums, and the stench of the powder, which seems something infernal, and the fire that they hurl from the mouth of the gun, and the impact of the ball, which shatters a tree to pieces at a single blow, and the account they gave him of the very strong weapons they used, both offensive and defensive, such as cuirasses, coats of mail, visored helmets, and the like, and swords, crossbows, harquebuses, lances, and so forth. Also the account of the horses, and of their great size, and of how the Spaniards mounted them in armor, so that nothing but their faces could be seen, and of how they had white faces, blue eyes, red hair, and long beards, and of how some black men came among them, who had crisply curled dark hair. They also told him of what the Spaniards ate, and of the dogs they brought, and of what they were like, and of the ferocity they showed, and of the color they were. When Moctezuma heard this account, he was shocked, and he began to be afraid, to lose heart, and to feel great anguish. Chapter 8. Of how Moctezuma sent his enchanters and casters of evil spells to do harm to the Spaniards. After the above said, Moctezuma then gathered some diviners and augurs, and some minor leaders, and sent them to the port where the Spaniards were, so that they might see to it that the Spaniards lacked neither food nor anything they might demand, and so that they might diligently observe and report to him everything that was happening. And he sent with them some captives to be sacrificed before the god who was coming, if they should see fit, and if he should demand blood to drink. Those envoys went and reached the place where the Spaniards were, and offered them tortillas sprinkled with human blood. And when the Spaniards saw that food, they were greatly disgusted by it. They began to spit and to abhor it, because the bread reeked of blood. This was done by order of Moctezuma, and he ordered it done because he held that those were gods who came from heaven, and they thought that the black men were black gods. They all ate the white bread without blood that the envoys brought, and the eggs and fowl and the fruit that they presented to them, and the envoys also received food for the horses. Moctezuma had sent those diviners, augurs, and necromancers to see whether they could work some enchantment or sorcery against the Spaniards, so that they might sicken, or die, or turn back. And these performed all their arts, as Moctezuma had ordered them, against the Spaniards, but nothing availed them, nor had any effect. And so they returned to bring Moctezuma the news of what had happened. They told him that those people they had seen were very strong, and that they, the sorcerers, were as nothing against them. Then Moctezuma sent other messengers, envoys, leaders, and caciques to go where the Spaniards were, ordering them under pain of death that with great diligence they should provide whatever the Spaniards might need, both on the sea and on the land. These messengers went with great haste and did everything that Moctezuma ordered them. All along the way they saw to providing the Spaniards with everything necessary, and served them with great diligence. Chapter 9. Of the lament that Moctezuma and all the Mexicans made when they learned that the Spaniards were so strong. When Moctezuma had heard the things mentioned above, he conceived within himself a sense that great evils were coming upon him and upon his kingdom, and he began to fear greatly, not he alone, but all those who learned this news already told. They all wept and were filled with anguish, and went about sad and with heads bowed. They formed little groups and spoke with dread of the news that had come. The mothers, weeping, took their children in their arms, and passing a hand over their heads said, "O my child, you have been born in an evil time. What great things you are to see! In what great travails you are to find yourself." It was told to Moctezuma how the Spaniards were bringing along a Mexican, Nahuatl-speaking Indian woman named Marina, a native of the town of Teocalhueyacan, which is on the shore of the North Sea, and that they brought her as interpreter, who said in the Mexican language everything that Captain Don Hernando Cortes commanded her. Then Moctezuma began to send messengers and leading men to where the Spaniards were, so that they might observe what was being done, and provide what was needed for the service of the Spaniards. Every day some went and others returned. The messengers never ceased going and coming, and the Spaniards did not cease asking after Moctezuma, wishing to know what kind of person he was, whether he was old or young or of middle age, or whether he had gray hair. The Mexican Indians answered the Spaniards, "He is a man of middle age. He is not old, nor is he fat. He is slender and lean." When Moctezuma heard the messenger's account of how the Spaniards were asking so much about him, and how they greatly desired to see him, he was seized with great anguish. He thought of fleeing, or of hiding, so that the Spaniards would not see him nor find him. He thought of hiding in some cave or of departing from this world and going to the underworld, or to the earthly paradise, or to some other secret place. And he discussed this with his friends, those in whom he confided. And they told him, "There are those who know the road to go to the underworld, and also to the earthly paradise, and to the house of the sun, and to the cave called Sincalco, which is near Tlatelolco, Tacubaya, behind Chapultepec, where it is famed that there are great secrets. In one of these places your majesty might find remedy. Let your majesty choose the place you wish, and we will take you there, and there you can console yourself without receiving any harm." Moctezuma was inclined to go to the cave of Sincalco, and so it was published throughout the whole land. But this business came to nothing. Nothing of what the necromancers said could be verified, and so Moctezuma tried to take courage, and to await whatever should come, and to expose himself to every danger. Chapter 10. Of how the Spaniards began to go into the interior of the country, and of how Moctezuma left the royal palace and went to his own house. Moctezuma, considering it now established, both by the things he had heard about the Spaniards, and by the omens that had occurred, and the prophecies, ancient and modern, which held that the Spaniards were to reign in this land, left the royal palaces and went to the house he had had before he was king or emperor. From the time the Spaniards set out from the seashore to go into the interior of the country, they took along a leading Indian named Tlaxcala to show them the way. This Indian had been taken from that province by the first ships that came to discover this land. Captain Don Hernando Cortes brought this Indian along with him, and he already knew something of the Spanish tongue. He, together with Marina, was an interpreter for Don Hernando Cortes, and it was he whom they took as guide of their road to come to Mexico. On reaching the province of Tecoac, which is Tlaxcalan territory, there were settled the Epidemic, warriors who guarded the frontier or boundaries of the Tlaxcalans. These came out to war against the Spaniards. The Spaniards began to fight with them, and the horsemen lanced many, and the harquebusiers and crossbowmen also killed many, so that they routed the whole army that had come. Those who survived fled. The Spaniards took the town and plundered what they found, and thus they destroyed those settlements. When the Tlaxcalans heard what had happened to their soldiers in Epidemic, they were shocked and began to be afraid. Then they assembled in council, and all conferred on the matter, to see whether they should go to war against the Spaniards or whether they should submit peacefully. They said, "We know that the Epidemic are very valiant and fight fiercely, and yet they are all destroyed. There was no resistance in them. In the closing and opening of an eye, they destroyed them. What can we do? It will be well that we receive them peacefully and take them as friends. This is better than to lose all our people." And so the lords of Tlaxcala agreed to receive them peacefully and take them as friends. Then the lords and leaders went out with a great multitude of bearers, tamames loaded with food of all kinds. Reaching them, they greeted Don Hernando Cortes peacefully, and he asked them, saying, "Where are you from, and where do you come from?" They said, "We are from the city of Tlaxcala, and we come to receive you, for we are glad of your coming. You have reached our land. Be very welcome. This land where you are, which is called Tlaxcalan, is your home and your land." The city that is now called Tlaxcala was, before the Spaniards came, called Tlaxcalan. Chapter 11. Of how the Spaniards reached Tlaxcala, then called Tlaxcalan. The lords and leaders of Tlaxcala brought the Spaniards into their society, receiving them peacefully, and took them straight to the royal palace, where they lodged them, and they gave them very good treatment, providing them with all necessary things with great diligence. They also gave them many of their maiden daughters, and the Spaniards received them and used them as their women. Then the captain began to ask about Mexico, saying, "Where is Mexico? Is it far from here?" They told him, "It is not far. It is 3 days' journey. It is a very populous city, and its inhabitants are valiant and great conquerors. Everywhere they make conquest." The Tlaxcalans and Cholulans were not friends. There was discord between them, and as they wished them ill, they spoke evil of them to the Spaniards, so that they would treat them badly. They told them that the Cholulans were their enemies and friends of the Mexicans, and valiant like them. When the Spaniards heard such news of Cholula, they resolved to treat them badly as they did. They all set out from Tlaxcala, accompanied by many Tempoalans and Tlaxcalans, all with their weapons of war. When they all reached Cholula, the Cholulans took no notice of anything. They received them neither with war nor with peace, but stayed quietly in their houses. From this the Spaniards formed a bad opinion of them, and conjectured some treason. Then they began to call out loudly to the leaders and lords and all the other people of Cholula to come to where the Spaniards were, and they all gathered in the courtyard of the great temple, Xuchi of Quetzalcoatl. When they were assembled there, the Spaniards, offended at the little notice that had been taken of them, entered on horseback, having secured all the entrances of the courtyard, and began to lance them and killed as many as they could. And it is to be believed that the friendly Indians killed many more. The Cholulans carried neither offensive nor defensive weapons, but had come unarmed, thinking that what was done would not be done, and in this way they died an evil death. As soon as all these things happened, Moctezuma's messengers came to tell him of them. The whole road was full of messengers, from here to there and from there to here, and all the people here in Mexico and in all the districts through which the Spaniards were coming went about greatly agitated and uneasy. It seemed that the earth moved. Everyone went about shocked and stunned. And after they had wrought that havoc in Cholula, the Spaniards with all their Indian friends came in a great multitude in squadrons, with much noise and a great cloud of dust, and from afar their weapons gleamed and caused great fear in those who looked on. Likewise the greyhounds they brought with them inspired great dread, for they were large, and came with their mouths open and their tongues hanging out, panting, and thus they inspired great fear in all who saw them. Chapter 12. Of how Moctezuma sent one of his high leaders, with many other leaders, who went to receive the Spaniards and gave a great present to the captain between the snowy peak and the volcano. When Moctezuma learned that the Spaniards had departed from Cholula and were on the road toward Mexico, he immediately dispatched one of his leaders, the most important in his court, called Huitzilopochtli, and with him many other leaders and a great many other people, to go to receive the Spaniards, and he gave them a present of gold to take. They set out from Mexico and came upon the Spaniards between the two mountains, that is, the snowy peak, Iztaccíhuatl, and the volcano, Popocatépetl. There they received them and presented the gift of gold that they brought. And according to the outward signs that the Indians saw in the Spaniards, it seemed to them that they were pleased and rejoiced greatly over the gold, for they held it in great esteem. And when the Spaniards saw the leader Tzihua-Popoca, they secretly asked the Tlaxcalans and Chempoalans who came along with them whether that was Moctezuma, and they told them no, that it was not he, but a leader of his named Tzihua-Popoca. And afterward they asked the leader himself whether he was Moctezuma, and he said that yes, he was Moctezuma. Then they told him, "Be off with you, you lie. You are not Moctezuma. Do you think to deceive us? Do you think we are simpletons? You cannot deceive us, nor can Moctezuma hide himself from us, however much he may do. Though he be a bird, and though he go beneath the earth, he will not be able to hide from us. We are going to see him, and to hear what he will tell us." Then with insult they sent away that leader and all those who had gone with him, and they returned to Mexico and recounted to Moctezuma what had passed with the Spaniards. Chapter 13. Of how Moctezuma sent other sorcerers against the Spaniards and what happened to them on the way. When Moctezuma learned that the Spaniards were already on their way to Mexico, he sent out to meet them many temple attendants of the idols, augurs, enchanters, and necromancers, so that with their enchantments and sorceries they might harm and bewitch them. But they were unable to do anything, nor could their enchantments harm them, nor did they even reach them, because before they arrived they ran into a drunk man on the road, and they went no farther. It seemed to them that he was an Indian from Chalco, and he seemed to them to be drunk. Tied across his chest he wore 8 halters or ropes made of grass, like esparto, and he was coming from the direction where the Spaniards were. When he drew near them, with great anger, he began to scold them, saying, "Why do you persist in coming here again? What is it you want? What does Moctezuma intend to do? Now he decides to wake up? Now he begins to be afraid? He has already made his mistakes. Now there is no remedy, for he has brought about many unjust deaths and destroyed many. He has committed much abuse and deceit and mockery. When the enchanters saw this man, they were greatly afraid and prostrated themselves before him. They began to beg him, and they made a mound of earth for an altar and threw green grass on top for him to sit on. But he, like an angry man, would neither sit down nor look at it, nor do what they begged him. In vain they made the altar or seat. Instead, he grew more fiercely angry, and scolded them the more sharply, and said to them loudly, with great vehemence, "You have come in vain. Never again will I take account of Mexico. Forever I leave you. I will have charge of you no longer, nor defend you. Depart from me. What you want cannot be done. Turn and look toward Mexico." Then they turned to look toward Mexico, and they saw that all the temples Cus were burning, and the Calpuli houses and the Calmecacs, houses of instruction, and all the houses of Mexico, and it seemed to them that there was a great war within the city of Mexico. When the enchanters saw that, they lost heart utterly and could not speak a word. A knot formed in their throats. This happened on the slope that rises toward Tlatelolco. When this had happened, the one who had spoken to them disappeared, and coming to themselves, they said, "What we have seen, it would have been fitting for Moctezuma to see, and not us. The one who has spoken to us is no human being. He is the god Tezcatlipoca." These messengers took no care to go any farther, but turned back to give Moctezuma an account of what had happened. When the messengers came into the presence of Moctezuma, and he had heard what they said, he was greatly saddened. He sat with his head down. He did not speak, but was struck dumb, almost beside himself. After a while he said to them, "What then are we to do, O noble men? We are already about to be lost. We have already swallowed death. We are not to climb up into some mountain, nor are we to flee. We are Mexicans. We will set ourselves to face whatever may come, for the honor of our Mexican nation. It grieves me for the old men and women, and for the little boys and girls, who have neither the means nor the discretion to help themselves. Where will their parents take them to safety? But what are we to do? We are born, let come what may." Chapter 14. Of how Moctezuma ordered the roads closed so that the Spaniards would not reach Mexico. When Moctezuma had heard all these things, and seeing that the Spaniards were coming straight toward Mexico, he ordered the roads closed. He ordered magueys planted in the roads by which they would have to pass, and ordered that the Spaniards be directed toward Texcoco. But the Spaniards recognized the closing of the roads and opened them again, throwing aside the magueys with which they were blocked. They slept the night in Amacamecan, and the next day departed from there and reached Cuitlahuac. In the town of Cuitlahuac, Don Hernando Cortes sent to summon all the lords who are in the Chinampa territory, that is, Xochimilco, Mizquich, and all the towns of the Chinampa country. There he spoke to them, telling them the reason for his coming. The people of Tlamanalco heard this speech at Amacamecan, and received Don Hernando Cortes peacefully. According to what is said, he spoke to them there, and all these towns of the Chinampa country likewise showed themselves peaceful. From there they set out for Iztapalapan, a town 2 leagues distant from Mexico. On arriving there, Don Hernando Cortes assembled the leaders called the Nahuatl, 4 lords, of Iztapalapan, Mexicatzinco, Colhuacan, and Huitzilopochtli, and there he spoke to them in the same manner as to the others, and they showed themselves peaceful and spoke as friends. In all this, Moctezuma provided nothing warlike, nor did he order that they be given any trouble. Rather, he provided that the Spaniards be supplied with everything necessary until they should reach Mexico. While the Spaniards were in Iztapalapan, none of the Mexicans went to see them, nor did they dare go out of their houses or walk about the roads. They were all terrified by what they had heard the Spaniards had done all along the way. They were awaiting death, and they spoke of this among themselves, saying, "What are we to do? Let it go however it will. The time has now come when we are to be destroyed. Let us await death here." Chapter 15. of how the Spaniards departed from Iztapalapan to enter Mexico. The Spaniards departed from Iztapalapan, all outfitted and ready for war, and ordered in squadrons. Some horsemen went ahead to discover whether there was any ambush. They also took the greyhounds ahead. In the rear guard went Don Hernando Cortes with many other Spaniards, all armed and in their order. Behind them went the baggage and the artillery on its carriages. Many Indian warriors went along with all their weapons, many Tlaxcalans and Huitzilopochtlis. In this order they entered Mexico. In all the rest of this chapter, Sahagun's Spanish column adds nothing further. He notes only that it describes the order that the Spaniards and their Indian allies kept when they entered Mexico. The detailed description, the 4 horsemen scouting ahead and turning to look in every direction, the dogs sniffing and panting, the standard-bearer whirling the banner, the swordsmen with bare gleaming blades, the mounted lancers on sweating, bell-hung horses whose hooves broke the ground, the crossbowmen with quivers packed with iron bolts, the harquebusiers who fired their guns as they entered the palace and filled the air with thunder and choking smoke, the war captain surrounded by his elite warriors, and the vast body of Tlaxcalan, Teocalhueyacan, and Huitzilopochtli allies bearing arms and provisions and dragging the great cannon on wooden wheels. All appears. Only in the Nahuatl column, which Sahagun did not render into Spanish here. Chapter 16 of how Moctezuma came out in peace to receive the Spaniards at the place called Tlatelolco, which is the canal beside the houses of Alvarado, or a little farther this way, which they call Huitzilopochtli. When the Spaniards reached that river beside the houses of Alvarado, called Tlatelolco, Moctezuma made ready to go receive them along with many lords, leaders, and nobles, in order to receive Don Hernando Cortes and the other captains in peace and with honor. They took many beautiful and fragrant flowers, made into strings and garlands and arrangements for the hands, and set them in very large and finely painted vessels made of gourds. And they also took necklaces of gold and precious stones. When Moctezuma reached the Spaniards at the place they call Huitzilopochtli, which is near the hospital of La Concepcion, there Moctezuma himself put a necklace of gold and precious stones on Captain Don Hernando Cortes, and gave flowers and garlands to all the other captains. When Moctezuma himself had given this present, as they were accustomed to do, Don Hernando Cortes asked Moctezuma whether he was indeed Moctezuma, and Moctezuma answered, "I am Moctezuma." And then he humbled himself before the captain, doing him great reverence, and drew himself up again face to face with him, the captain being close to him, and he began to speak to him in this manner: "O our Lord, be very welcome. You have reached your land, your town, and your home, Mexico. You have come to sit upon your throne and your seat, which I have possessed for some days in your name. Other lords, now dead, held it before me. One was named Itzcoatl, another Moctezuma the Elder, another Axayacatl, another Tizosich, another Ahuitzotl. I, the last of all, have come to hold charge and to govern this your town of Mexico. All of us have borne your commonwealth and your vassals on our backs. The dead can no longer see or know what is now happening. Would to him by whom we live that one of them were alive, and that in his presence might occur what occurs in mine. But they are absent. O our Lord, I am neither asleep nor dreaming. With my eyes I see your face and your person. For days I have awaited this. For days my heart has been gazing toward those parts from which you have come. You have emerged from among the clouds and the mists, a place hidden from all. This is surely what the kings who are gone left announced, that you were to return to reign in these kingdoms, and that you were to take your seat upon your throne and your chair. Now I see that what they left announced is true. Be very welcome. You must have undergone great travails in coming such long roads. Rest now. Here are your home and your palaces. Take them and rest in them with all your captains and companions who have come with you." When Moctezuma had finished his speech, Marina interpreted it for Don Hernando Cortes. And when Don Hernando Cortes had understood what Moctezuma had said, he said to Marina, "Tell Moctezuma to console himself and be glad, and to have no fear, for I love him greatly, and all who come with me, he will receive harm from no one. We have received great contentment in seeing him and knowing him, which we have desired for many days now. Our desire has been fulfilled. We have come to his home, Mexico. At leisure we shall speak together." Then Don Hernando Cortes took Moctezuma by the hand, and the two went together side by side toward the royal palace. The lords who were present with Moctezuma were the following: the lord of Texcoco, named Cacamatzin; second, the lord of Tacuba, named Tetlepanquetzatzin; third, the one who governed in Tlatelolco, named Itzcuautzin; and fourth, the major domo whom Moctezuma had placed in Tlatelolco, named Topantamoxtzin. These were the highest Mexican leaders, besides many other lesser Mexican leaders who were present there, one named Atlixcatzin, Tlacatecatl; another named Tepehuatzin, Tlacochcalcatl; another Quetzalaztatzin, Teocalhueyacan; another named Totomaxtzin, Ecatempatiltzin; another named Quapiatzin. All these, when Moctezuma was taken prisoner, abandoned him and hid themselves. Chapter 17. Of how the Spaniards with Moctezuma arrived at the royal palace, and of what happened there. As soon as the Spaniards reached the royal palace with Moctezuma, they detained him there with them, and never again let him leave their side. They also detained with them Itzcuautzin, governor of Tlatelolco. These two they kept, and let the rest go. Then they discharged all the firearms they had brought, and at the noise and smoke of the shots all the Indians who were there stood as if stunned, and went about like drunk men, and in fright began to scatter in various directions. And thus both those present and those absent conceived a mortal terror. They slept there that night, and the next day, early in the morning, it began to be proclaimed on behalf of the captain and of Moctezuma that all the things needed for the Spaniards and for the horses should be brought. Moctezuma took great pains that all the necessary things be brought, but the nobles and headmen and other officials, whose task this provisioning was, would not obey Moctezuma, nor come near him. Yet for all that, they provided everything necessary. When the Spaniards had settled into their lodging and arranged all their supplies, and had rested, they began to ask Moctezuma about the royal treasure, that he might tell them where it was. And he took them to a hall called Teocalco, where they kept all the rich featherwork and many other jewels of feathers, gold, and precious stones, and these were brought out before them. The Spaniards began to strip the gold from the feather pieces, the shields, and the other dance ornaments that were there, and to strip off the gold they destroyed all the featherwork and the rich jewels. The gold they melted down and made into bars, and the stones that seemed good to them they took. The lesser stones and the featherwork were all taken by the Indians of Tlaxcala, and the Spaniards searched the whole royal house and took everything that seemed good to them. Chapter 18. Of how the Spaniards entered the private house of Moctezuma, and of what happened there. When the above had been done, the Spaniards sought to learn about Moctezuma's private chamber, and he took them to his storehouse, called Teocalhueyacan, which means the house of the birds. The Spaniards went along very joyfully, thinking that they would find much gold there, and on arriving, they at once took out the whole of Moctezuma's own storehouse, where there were many jewels of gold and silver and precious stones, and they took it all. From the rich feather pieces they stripped off all the gold and the stones, and they put the feathers in the middle of the courtyard for their friends, the allied Indians, to take. Then Captain Don Hernando Cortes gave orders through Marina, who was his interpreter, an Indian woman who knew the language of Castile and that of Mexico, whom they had taken in Yucatan, and she began to call out loudly to the Mexican lords and nobles to come to give the Spaniards the food they needed, but no one dared to come before them or approach them. They were all terrified and frightened. They sent them the food they needed, but those who carried it went trembling, and when they had set the food down, they lingered no longer, but immediately left, almost fleeing. Chapter 19. Of how the Spaniards ordered the Indians to hold the festival of Huitzilopochtli. This was in the absence of the captain, when he went to the port because of the coming of Panfilo de Narvaez. When Captain Don Hernando Cortes had departed for the port to receive Panfilo de Narvaez, he left in his place Don Pedro de Alvarado, with the Spaniards who remained here in Mexico, Alvarado in the captain's absence, urged Moctezuma to order the festival of Huitzilopochtli to be held, because they wished to see how they performed that solemnity. Moctezuma ordered this festival to be held, to give contentment to the Spaniards, and so both the temple attendants and the leading men prepared themselves to hold the festival. In the rest of this chapter, Sahagún's Spanish column says only this, that the text following describes the manner in which they made the image of Huitzilopochtli from a dough of various seeds and vegetables, how they painted it, how they arrayed it, and how afterward they offered many things before it. It adds that during the ceremonies all the leaders, very richly costumed, performed a great dance arrayto in the great courtyard of the temple of Huitzilopochtli, where the image made of amaranth dough stood, richly adorned with many ornaments, all of which Sahagún notes are explained in the Nahuatl text, along with the other ceremonies set out through this whole chapter. The lengthy, precise description of the god's image and the dance survives only in the Nahuatl column and was not rendered by Sahagún into Spanish. Chapter 20. Of how the Spaniards made a great slaughter of the Indians while they were holding the festival of Huitzilopochtli in the courtyard of that same Huitzilopochtli. At the time that seemed opportune to them, the Spaniards came out from where they were, and took all the gates of the courtyard, so that no one could get out, and others entered with their weapons, and began to kill those who were in the dance. To those who were playing the instruments they cut off the hands and the heads, and they dealt sword blows and lance thrusts to all whom they encountered, and made a very great slaughter. Those who ran fleeing to the gates were killed there. Some leaped over the walls, some went into the chapels of the temples, and there threw themselves down and pretended to be dead. The blood ran through the courtyard like water when it rains, and the whole courtyard was strewn with heads and arms and entrails and bodies of dead men, and in every corner the Spaniards searched out those who were alive to kill them. When word of this deed went out through the city, they began to cry out, saying, "To arms! To arms!" At these cries a great multitude of people gathered, all with their weapons, and they began to fight against the Spaniards. Chapter 21. Of how the war began between the Mexicans and the Spaniards in Mexico. When the war between the Indians and the Spaniards began, the Spaniards fortified themselves in the royal palace, together with Moctezuma himself, and also with Itzcuauhtzin, the governor of Tlatelolco. The Indians surrounded them and fought them fiercely. The Spaniards defended themselves with the firearms, crossbows, and harquebuses, and did the Indians great harm. Then they put Moctezuma in irons. The Indians also began to bury those whom the Spaniards had killed in the courtyard, and for their death a great lamentation went up throughout the whole city, because those who had died were people of very high rank. They buried them in various places according to their rites, that same day at sunset. Itzcuauhtzin, governor of Tlatelolco, climbed up onto the rooftop terraces of the royal palace and began to cry out, saying, "O Mexicans, O Tlatelolcans, consider that the Lord Moctezuma your king begs you to cease fighting and lay down your weapons. For these men are very strong, stronger than we. If you do not cease making war on them, the whole people will suffer great harm, for they have already tied your king with iron." When the Mexicans and Tlatelolcans heard these cries, they began to rage among themselves against Moctezuma and to curse him, saying, "What does this coward Moctezuma say? And you, a wretch, along with him. We will not cease the war." Then they began to give war cries and to shoot arrows and darts toward where the speaker stood, together with Moctezuma, but the Spaniards covered them with shields, and so they received no harm. They had great fury against the Spaniards because they had killed the leaders and valiant men treacherously, and therefore they kept the royal palace surrounded, letting no one go in or out or bring in any provisions, so that they should die of hunger. And if anyone secretly brought food to those inside, when those outside learned of it, they killed him. Those outside learned that some Mexicans were going in there, secretly carrying in arrows. Then they set a great watch that no one should enter, neither by land nor by water, and those whom they found guilty of having taken anything in, they killed. Then a great turmoil arose among the Mexicans, some accusing others of having gone in, And so they killed many, especially the servants or pages of Moctezuma, who wore crystal lip plugs, which were a particular livery or mark of those of Moctezuma's household, and also those who wore thin cloaks called ayatol, which were the livery of Moctezuma's pages. They accused them all, saying that they had gone in to give food to their lord and to tell what was happening outside, and they killed them all. From then on there was great vigilance that no one should enter, and so all those of Moctezuma's household fled and hid, so that they would not be killed. The Mexicans assaulted the Spaniards for 7 days, and kept them surrounded for 23 days. And during this time they widened and deepened the canals, and blocked the roads with walls, and made great bulwarks, so that the Spaniards should not be able to get out anywhere. Chapter 22. Of how news came that Captain Don Hernando Cortes, having defeated Panfilo de Narvaez, was now returning toward Mexico with many other Spaniards who had newly arrived. With things being in the state described above, news came that Captain Don Hernando Cortes was coming in great haste, with many Spaniards and many Indians of Cholula and Tlaxcala, all armed and ready for war. The Mexicans agreed among themselves to hide all of them, and not to come out to receive them, whether with war or with peace. And the Spaniards, with all the rest of their friends, went straight toward the royal palace, where the other Spaniards were. The Mexicans were all watching, hidden, so that the Spaniards would not see them. They did this to make it understood that they had not begun the war. When the captain entered the royal palace with all the rest of the people, they began to fire all the guns, in rejoicing over those who had arrived, and to strike fear into their adversaries. Then the Mexicans began to show themselves, and to give war cries, and to fight against the Spaniards, hurling arrows and darts at them, and the Spaniards likewise began to fight, shooting arrows and firearms. Many of the Mexicans were killed. The Spaniards aimed all their shots so accurately that there was never a shot that did not kill someone with it. And when the Mexicans saw the harm they were receiving from the Spaniards, they began to zigzag, to escape the shots and to move sideways. They gave battle for 4 days, running against the houses where the Spaniards were. And after these 4 days, the Mexican captains chose many veteran soldiers and valiant men, who climbed up onto a temple, the one nearest the royal palace, and hauled up there 2 round beams to hurl them down onto the royal palace and collapse it, so that they could enter. When the Spaniards saw this, they at once climbed the temple in good order, carrying their harquebuses and crossbows. They began to climb very slowly, shooting the crossbows and harquebuses at those above. In each row a harquebusier went ahead, then a soldier with sword and shield, then a halberdier. In this order they went climbing the temple. Those above threw the timbers down the steps of the temple, but they did the Spaniards no harm. Reaching the top of the temple, they began to strike and kill those who were up there, and many of them threw themselves headlong down the temple. Finally, all who had climbed the temple died, and the Spaniards returned to their fort and barricaded themselves well. The Mexicans buried those who died there, because they were all leading people, of great account in the war. Chapter 23. Of how Moctezuma and the governor of Tlatelolco were thrown out dead from the house where the Spaniards were fortified. After the above said, 4 days after the killing at the temple, the Mexicans found Moctezuma and the governor of Tlatelolco dead, thrown outside the royal palace near the wall, where there was a stone carved like a tortoise, which they called Teocalhueyacan. After those who found them recognized who they were, they gave orders and took them up from there, and carried them to an oratory that they called Capulco, and there they performed for them the ceremonies they were accustomed to perform for the dead of great rank. Afterward they burned them as they customarily did for all the lords, and performed all the solemnities they usually performed in such a case. One of them, Moctezuma, they buried in Mexico, and the other in Tlatelolco. Some spoke ill of Moctezuma because he had been very cruel. The people of Tlatelolco wept much for their governor because he was very well liked. After some days that the Spaniards had been surrounded, and every day were given battle, one day some of them sallied out from their fort and gathered from the maize fields ears and stalks of maize, and then returned to their fort. Chapter 24. Of how the Spaniards and Tlaxcalans left Mexico fleeing by night. After the Spaniards and the friends who were with them found themselves sorely pressed, both by hunger and by war, one night they all came out of their fort, the Spaniards ahead and the Tlaxcalan Indians behind, and they carried some bridges already made, with which to cross the canals. When this happened, it was raining gently. They crossed 4 canals, but before they could cross the rest, a woman went out to fetch water and saw them going, and she cried out, saying, "O Mexicans, now your enemies are leaving." She said this 3 or 4 times. Then one of those who kept watch began to cry out from the temple, "Q of Huitzilopochtli," in such a way that everyone heard him saying, "O valiant men, now your enemies have come out. Begin to fight, for they are leaving." When they all heard this cry, they began to give war cries, and then they began to attack, both by land and by water. They rushed to a place called Mictlantonco Maquilquetlapilco. There they cut off the Spaniards, the Mexicans from one side, the Tlatelolcans from the other, and there they began to fight against the Spaniards and the Spaniards against them, and thus many were killed and wounded on both sides. When the Spaniards reached a canal named Tlaltecayocan, since they could not all cross it, and were being attacked from all sides, the Tlaxcalan Indians fell into the canal, along with many of the Spaniards and the women who were with them. So many fell in that the canal filled up, and those who came behind were able to cross the canal over the dead. They reached another canal named Teocalhueyacan, and crossed it with much difficulty. Having crossed it, they all reorganized themselves and gathered their strength, and reached another place called Papatla just as dawn was breaking. The Mexicans followed them with great shouting. The Spaniards, with some Tlaxcalans, went on together along their way, both sides fighting each other, and they followed them as far as near Tacuba, to a place called Teocalhueyacan, and there they killed the lord of Tacuba, who was a son of Moctezuma. Here also died a leader named Tlaltecatzin, and another named Tepanecatl all of whom had been guiding the Spaniards, and the enemies killed them. The Spaniards reached a place called Otanteocalco. There they took refuge in the courtyard and refreshed themselves, because the Mexican Indians had already turned back to gather the spoils from the field. There the automus of the town of Teocalhueyacan came to receive them in peace and gave them food. Chapter 25. Of how the people of Teocalhueyacan came out in peace, and with provisions, to the Spaniards when they went fleeing from Mexico. While the Spaniards were in this lodging mentioned above, the automis of Teocalhueyacan came, with their leader named Otoncoatl, and brought food to the Spaniards, who were in great need. They gave them many tortillas, and roasted and boiled fowl, and other kinds of food, and they spoke to Captain Don Hernando Cortes, greeting him in peace and begging that they might rest and eat. Then the captain spoke to them through the interpreter, the Indian woman Marina, asking them where they were from. They said that they were from the town of Teocalhueyacan. Then, being informed how far off their town was, the captain told them, "Tomorrow we will go to sleep the night at your town." They gave thanks because he wished to go to their town. After the captain had reached this fort already mentioned with the Spaniards and their friends, the Mexicans began to take out the people, Spaniards as well as Tlaxcalans and Chempoalans, who had drowned in the canal called Tolteca-Acaloco, and in the one called Petlacalco, and in the one called Mictlantonco. They took them out and stripped them, and threw them naked among the reeds and rushes, so that the birds and dogs would eat them there. The Spaniards they threw in another place apart, because they recognized that they were bearded and had very white bodies. They also broke up and plundered the loads of the horses that had drowned, and all the burdens they carried. They took all the weapons they found. They also took the firearms they found, and spilled out all the powder there was. They took many harquebuses, and many crossbows, and many swords, and many halberds, and many helmets, and cuirasses, and coats of mail, and many leather shields, and lances, and many round shields. Here too they took much gold, in small bars, in vessels, and in gold dust, and many jewels of gold and precious stones. Then they began to search through all the canals for whatever spoils had fallen in, both from the living and from the dead. Only the Spaniards who went in the vanguard saved themselves, along with the Indians who went with them. Those who went in the rear guard all died, Indian women as well as men and the Spaniards, and all the baggage was lost. The Spaniards who escaped slept the night in a place called Acueco, and from there they set out very early in the morning, and the Mexicans went in pursuit of them, shouting at them from afar. Reaching a place called Calicoyan, which is on top of the hills, they destroyed that whole town. They went down toward the plains, to a place called Tizapán, and then they began to climb toward the town of Teocalhueyacan. Chapter 26 of how the Spaniards reached the town of Teocalhueyacan and the good treatment they received there. The Spaniards reaching the town of Teocalhueyacan before midday were very well received by the Otomis to whom that town belonged, and they at once gave them much food which they had prepared for them. They entertained and refreshed them greatly, both them and all who went with them, and also gave the horses whatever they needed, if they had it. The Tlaxcalan Otomis, who had escaped from the battle, recognized the people of Teocalhueyacan, because they were all relatives. It was from this town of Teocalhueyacan that they had gone to settle Tlaxcala. Then all of them together took counsel to greet the captain and the Spaniards, and they all went together to speak to the captain and the other captains, telling them that this was their home and their town, and that they were their vassals. They also complained to the captain of the bad treatment that Moctezuma and the Mexicans had given them, loading them with much tribute and many hardships, and they said that if the Spaniards left them, the Mexicans would give them still worse treatment, because the Mexicans were cruel and inhuman. When Marina had told the captain what the Otomis said, the captain told them, "Do not be troubled. Although I am going, I will return quickly, and I will make this a head town, not subject to Mexico, and I will destroy the Mexicans." When the Otomis of Teocalhueyacan heard these words, they were greatly consoled and gained the confidence and boldness to rebel against the Mexicans. The Spaniards slept there that night. The next day, before dawn, they made ready to depart and took the road to Tepoztlan, reaching that place before midday. When the people of Tepoztlan saw that they were coming to their town, they all began at once to flee, going into the mountains and hiding in the ravines. No one remained in the town to receive the Spaniards. They took nothing with them. They left all their property and saved only their persons, because they were greatly afraid that the Spaniards were going to kill them. The Spaniards went into the chief residence or palace of the lord of that town. They slept all together that night, and all were in great fear that the enemy would fall upon them. The next day at dawn they breakfasted on what they found in the houses of the town, and after breakfast they departed. And on the road by which they went, the Mexicans came behind them, shouting at them, and if anyone drew near the Spaniards, they killed him at once. They went straight to the town of Tlatelolco, and when the people of Tlatelolco saw that the Spaniards were coming there, they hid themselves and gave them no reception at all. The Spaniards ate what they found about the houses, and slept there that night, and in the morning breakfasted. Having breakfasted, they departed. They reached the town called Xoloc, and its inhabitants all fled. No one dared await them. They all climbed the hill called Xoloc and hid there, and all were in great fear. The Spaniards slept there that night. The next morning, very early, after breakfasting, the Spaniards departed. The horsemen went along the road in 2 files, and all the foot soldiers and those who carried loads went in the middle, between the horsemen along the road. They burned all the houses of the demons, temples, they found at hand, because they were of thatch. And as the houses caught fire, those who saw it were amazed. As the Spaniards went forward on their way, the common people of those places came behind them, shouting at them, but dared not approach. That day they reached the town called Aztaquemican, whose people are settled on a high mountain. The Spaniards climbed the mountain toward them and lodged on its lower slopes, in a settlement called Sacamolco, which is on a hill. They lodged in a temple, Siu, of the Otomis. The inhabitants of that town also fled and abandoned the town. Chapter 27 of how the Mexicans in pursuit reached the place where the Spaniards were. While the Spaniards were in this town, a great number of Mexicans arrived with the intention of finishing them off and took up a position near a slope called Tonan, which means our mother. Then the Mexicans sent spies to watch the Spaniards to see when they should take the road. When the Spaniards began to travel, The spies cried out to the Mexicans, telling them that the Spaniards were now leaving. Hearing this, the Mexicans at once began to march after them. The Spaniards, seeing them coming behind in great haste, understood that they wished to fight, and halted, and put themselves in battle order. And because the Mexicans were many, they surrounded the Spaniards and began to fight them on all sides. But the Spaniards killed many Mexicans and Tlatelolcans because they hurled themselves so recklessly upon the Spaniards, and thus many of them died and they were put to flight. Having won this battle, the Spaniards continued on their way, and from there onward the Mexicans did not follow them. From the time the Spaniards entered Mexico until they left, they were there 235 days, and for 85 days they were at peace and in friendship with the Indians. The Nahuatl account gives the days of peace as 195, and the enemy days as 40. Sahagun's Spanish here differs. When the Spaniards had won the battle mentioned above, they at once took their road toward Tlaxcala, and as they entered Tlaxcalan territory, the Mexicans turned back. They searched among the dead for the notable persons who had been killed, and performed their funeral rites for them, and burned their bodies and took the ashes. And they returned to Mexico, saying that the Spaniards had fled and were never going to return again. According to the account of the Spaniards who were there, when they had entered the territory of Tlaxcala, the leading people of Tlaxcala, men as well as women, came out to receive them with much food. They took them to their city, carrying on their backs those who could not walk, and tending the wounded. And on reaching the city of Tlaxcala, they treated them very well, and grieved and wept over the disaster that had befallen them, and over the many who had been left dead in Mexico, Spaniards as well as Tlaxcalan Indians. The Spaniards healed their wounds and regained their strength in the city of Tlaxcala for more than half a year, and they were too few to give battle to the Mexicans again. In this interval there arrived in Tlaxcala one Francisco Hernandez, a Spaniard, with 300 Spanish soldiers, and with many horses and weapons and pieces of artillery and munitions. With this Captain Don Hernando Cortes, and those who were with him, who had escaped from the war, took courage to equip themselves anew and go back to reconquer Mexico. Chapter 28. The first festival that the Mexicans held after the Spaniards left this city by night. When the Spaniards left Mexico and went to Tlaxcala, it was the month called Teocalhueyacan, which begins on the 2nd of June, and when the following month, which they call Huitzilopochtli, beginning on the 22nd of June, had come, now that they were somewhat rested from the past war, they held a very great festival for all their gods. They took out all their statues and adorned them with their ornaments, and with many quetzal feathers of rich plumage, and put on them their masks of turquoise mosaic. They did this in thanksgiving to their gods for having freed them from their enemies. There follows in the Spanish column a list of the 18 Nahuatl months of 20 days, and the days they were reckoned to begin. Tlaxcala, July 12th. Cholula, August 1st. Ochpanistli, August 20th. Tlatelolco, September 10th. Teocalhueyacan, September 30th. Quecholi, October 20th. Panquetzalistli, November 9th. Adamostli, November 29th. Title, December 19th. Izcalli, January 8th. Then the 5 days they called Nemontemi, meaning idle or unlucky days, which they did not count with the year. Then the next year began, with the month they call Coahuitl-Ehua, beginning the 2nd of February. Then Tlaxcala, February 21st. Tochostantli, March 15th, and Huitzilopochtli, April 3rd. It was in this last month, Sahagun notes, that the Spaniards left Mexico fleeing the year before. In this year some of them returned. They came by way of Cuautitlan and reached Tacuba, where they stayed only 7 days. Then they went back, but 40 days later they returned again and destroyed some settlements, killing more than 400 men who were commoners of Tlatelolco. And 40 days after that, it was reckoned 2 years since their first coming. They all returned in the month called Tlaxcala. Chapter 29. Of the pestilence of smallpox that came upon the Indians after the Spaniards left Mexico. Before the Spaniards who were in Tlaxcala came to conquer Mexico, a pestilence of smallpox broke out among all the Indians in the month they called Teocalhueyacan, which is at the end of September. Very many Indians died of this pestilence. They had their whole bodies and their faces and all their limbs so full of pox, and so afflicted by them, that they could not stir or move from their place, nor turn from one side to the other, and if anyone moved them, they cried out. This pestilence killed people without number. Many died of hunger because there was no one who could prepare food. Those who escaped this pestilence were left with their faces pitted, and some with their eyes ruined. The force of this pestilence lasted 60 days, and after it began to slacken in Mexico, it went toward Chalco. When this pestilence was ending in Mexico, the Spaniards, who were already in Texcoco, arrived. They skirted the lake and came by Cuautitlan as far as Tacuba, and there they divided themselves into companies and took up various stations. To Don Pedro de Alvarado fell the road that goes from Tacuba straight to Tlatelolco. Captain Don Hernando Cortes stationed himself in Coyoacan and guarded the road that goes from Coyoacan to Mexico. The war began first toward the direction of Tlatelolco, at a place called Nextlatilco, and fighting they went as far as the place called Nonoalco, where there is now a church called San Miguel, but the Spaniards withdrew, gaining nothing in this skirmish. Captain Don Hernando Cortes also attacked the Mexicans on his side by the road called Acachinanco, and the Mexicans resisted them strongly. Chapter 30. Of how the brigantines that the Spaniards made in Texcoco came against Mexico. These brigantines were built in Tlaxcala, and the Indians carried them in pieces on their backs to the lake, where they were assembled. While the Spaniards were in Tlaxcala, they built 12 brigantines, and before assembling them, the Indians carried them in pieces to Texcoco, and there they assembled them, nailing them together and caulking them. When they had been finished, and the artillery placed in them, the Spaniards assigned to them boarded, and came by the lake to a landing place called Acachinanco, which is near Mexico, in the vicinity of the church of San Antonio, close to the houses of Alvarado. Then Captain Don Hernando Cortes went into the brigantines, and they began to sound the water to discover the depth in the places where the brigantines would have to go. When they had found the ways by which the brigantines could go, they took up a warlike stance in the brigantines, determined to destroy the Mexicans. Then, drawn up in order, with their banner at the front and playing their fife and drum, they began to fight against the Mexicans. When the battle began on the water, many of the Mexicans who had their houses in the water began to flee with their wives and children, some carrying their children on their backs, others in canoes. They left all their belongings in their houses, and the Indians who were helping the Spaniards went into the houses they had abandoned and stole whatever they found. The Indians of Tlatelolco also went about there, fighting with their canoes. When the Spaniards reached the place where a canal was blocked with a barricade or wall, they knocked it down with the artillery. 2 brigantines passed through and began to fight with those who were defending the canal. The Spaniards and the brigantines turned the artillery toward where the canoes were thickest, and did great harm to the Indians with the artillery and harquebuses. Seeing this, the Mexicans began to draw back and to protect themselves from the artillery, going zigzagging with the canoes, and also when they saw that some cannon was about to be fired, they crouched down in the canoes. They began to withdraw toward the houses, and so the road was left empty. The Spaniards reached a place called Huitzilopochtli, which is near the church of San Pablo. Another barrier had been built there, and behind it were many of the Mexicans. The brigantines halted there for a time, while they adjusted the artillery to knock down the barrier. Chapter 31. Of how those in the brigantines, having driven off the canoes that came out against them on the lake, reached land next to the houses. After the Spaniards had adjusted their cannon, they fired at the barrier with them. With the first volleys, they ruined it entirely, and with the second, they knocked it to the ground. Then the Indian soldiers who were behind the barrier began to flee, and the friendly Indians filled in the canal with stones, adobes, earth, and timbers, in order to be able to go forward. When they had the canal filled level, the horsemen came and entered the city, and lanced the Indians they could, and then came back out, and other horsemen entered and did the same, and the Indians took refuge in the royal palace. They also lanced a group of Indians, among whom was one from Tlatelolco, who seized the lance with which he was run through, and others of his companions likewise grabbed hold of it and took it from the horsemen, and with it they killed him and unhorsed him. Then the Spaniards assembled and entered a courtyard they called Teocalhueyacan. They took with them a heavy cannon and aimed it. In this place there was a large stone eagle, as tall as a standing man, and for that reason the courtyard was called Teocalhueyacan, Eagle Gate. On one side of the eagle was a jaguar, also of stone, and on the other a wolf, also of stone. The captains of the Indians hid behind 8 stone columns that were there, and many other people were on top of the building that rose above the columns. The Spaniards fired the heavy cannon they had brought at that building, and with the thunderous sound and the smoke, those who were below took fright and began to run away, and those above threw themselves down, and they all fled. They took the cannon farther ahead, in the direction of the square of Huitzilopochtli, where there was a large round stone like a millstone. On the temple askew of Huitzilopochtli, some temple attendants were seated, playing a teponazli log drum and singing, and although they saw what was happening, they did not stop playing and singing. 2 Spaniards climbed up, killed them, and threw them down the steps of the temple. As the Spaniards entered the city, the Indians skilled with the canoes came and leapt ashore, and began to summon other people to prevent the Spaniards' entry. When the Spaniards saw the Indians coming against them with great force and scattering them, they regrouped and began to withdraw, and the Indians fought fiercely. The Spaniards retreated to their base called Acachinanco, leaving the cannon in the courtyard of Huitzilopochtli. The Indians took it from there and threw it into deep water at a place they called Teocalhueyacan, which is near the hill called Tepetzinco, where the baths are. Chapter 32. Of how the Mexicans gave up and began to leave the city for fear of the Spaniards. After the things mentioned above, the Mexican Indians fled toward Tlatelolco, leaving the city of Mexico in the hands of the Spaniards, and the Indians of Tlatelolco went to Mexico to make war on the Spaniards. Don Pedro de Alvarado, who during all these days was fighting against the Tlatelolcans in the station they call Ilyacac, near Nonoalco, achieved nothing, because the Tlatelolcans defended themselves very well by land and by water. When Alvarado saw that he was getting nowhere with them, he lost heart and returned to Tacuba. 2 days later, the Spaniards came against them with all the Brigantines, close to the houses of Tlatelolco. 2 of the Brigantines went toward the district called Nonoalco, and drove off all the war canoes there, and they went ashore and began to enter among the houses in military formation. All the Indians drew back, none came out against the Spaniards. Because no one dared to go against them, a valiant man, a citizen of Tlatelolco named Tzilicatzin, came out against the Spaniards, and by hurling stones killed some of them, for he had great strength in his arm. Others came out behind him and made the Spaniards retreat, and they returned to the water, toward where they had the Brigantines. This Tzilicatzin carried weapons and insignia in the style of an Otomi, and with his ferocity he frightened not only the Indian friends of the Spaniards, but also the Spaniards themselves. The Spaniards took great pains to kill him, but each day he disguised himself so that they would not recognize him. Sometimes he went with his head uncovered like an Otomi. Other times he armed himself with cotton armor, and other times he put on a hairpiece so that they would not see or know him. The next day the Spaniards did the same. They came in the Brigantines with many Indian friends to the same district of Nonoalco. They began to fight with the Tlatelolcans, and the battle was joined fiercely, and they fought all day until night, and many Indians died on both sides. 3 very valiant Indians of Tlatelolco distinguished themselves there at that time. One called Soyektzin, another called Temoctzin, and the third Tzilicatzin already mentioned. When the Spaniards saw that night was coming and they were gaining nothing, they returned to their base with their Indian friends. Chapter 33. Of how the Chinampa, who are those of Xochimilco, Cuitlahuac, Iztapalapan, etc., came to the aid of the Mexicans. With things in the state told above, the Chinampa, that is, those of Xochimilco, Cuitlahuac, Mizquish, Iztapalapan, Mexicatzinco, etc., came to give aid to the Mexicans and Tlatelolcans, who were all fortified in Tlatelolco. On arriving, they spoke to the Lord of Mexico, called Cuauhtemoc, and to the other leaders who were with him. The captains addressed him, saying, "Our Lord, we have come to help you in this time of need, and for this our elders have sent us to pay the debt we owe. For this we have brought, and here they are present, the best soldiers we have among us, to help by water and by land." Hearing this, the Lord of Mexico and the others said, "We are grateful for what the Lords do in sending you to our aid. Make yourselves ready to fight." Then they gave them weapons to fight with and gave them much cacao, and then placed them in the position where they were to do battle. Once in their places, they all began to fight. But the Xochimilca began to rob about the houses where there were only women and children and old women, and they killed some of the women and children and old women, and put others into the canoes to carry off as slaves. Some Mexican soldiers saw what was happening and warned the captains. Then they went against them by water and by land, and began to kill some of them and take captives. They destroyed and killed them all, and got away nothing of the women, children, and old women they had captured, nor of the plunder. After the battle, the Spaniards withdrew to their quarters. The Mexicans took the Xochimilca, Cuitlahuaca, Mexicatzinca, people of Iztapalapan, etc., whom they had captured before Cuauhtemoc, who was in a place called Yacacolco, in Tlatelolco, where there is now a church of Santa Ana. And they told Cuauhtemoc and Mayihuatzin of the treachery the Xochimilca and Cuitlahuaca had committed. And Mayihuatzin, Lord of Cuitlahuac, reprimanded those who had done the wicked deeds. Cuauhtemoc said to Mayihuatzin, "Brother, do your office, punish those who have sinned." Then Mayihuatzin began to kill some of them, and Cuauhtemoc helped him. Each of them killed 4, and the Mexicans ordered that all the rest be killed in the temples of the idols, and they died in all the many temples that there were. Because of this, the Mexicans conceived a great anger against the Xochimilca, saying, "These Xochimilca dwell among us and spy on us and tell the people of their town what we are doing. Let them die." And having resolved to kill them all, they began to drag them out of their houses, men and women, old men and old women, and they killed them all, leaving no one, out of hatred for those who had committed treachery under pretense of giving aid. 2 or 3 days later, 2 brigantines came toward the part of Tlatelolco called Iyautenco, and in them came Spaniards alone without any Indians. When they arrived, they came ashore, and on land began to fight, shooting crossbow bolts and musket balls. The soldiers of Tlatelolco crouched and hid behind the walls and the houses, and the captains, watching for when it would be time, began to cry out for the battle to begin. Chapter 34 of how the Mexican Indians captured 15 Spaniards. The captain said, "On then, Mexicans, on then, Mexicans." Then they all began to blow their trumpets and to fight with the Spaniards, and they carried the day against the Spaniards and captured 15 Spaniards, and the Spaniards fled with the Brigantines to the deep part of the lake. From the captives they took the weapons and stripped them, and carried them to a temple, Sioux, called Tlaxcala. There they took out their hearts before the idol called Mequiltotec, and the other Spaniards were watching from the Brigantines as they killed them. Another time 2 Brigantines came to the district called Zocatitlan, and when they reached land they disembarked, fighting their way forward into the district. When that Indian captain named Silacatzin saw that they were entering, fighting, he came against them with other people who followed him, and fighting they drove them out of that district and made them take refuge in the Brigantines. Another time 2 Brigantines came to the district called Coyonacasco. The Spaniards disembarked and began to fight. Rodrigo de Castañeda came there as captain. They began to shoot crossbow bolts, and Castañeda killed someone with a bolt. Some Indian soldiers leapt upon him and knocked him into the water, and were on the point of killing him had he not escaped by grasping a brigantine. Another of the Spaniards' brigantines was at a place called Tetanantepozco, near the church called Santa Lucia. Another brigantine was in the district called Toteco, next to the church of La Concepcion. These brigantines lay in the water, biding their time. They were there all day long, and at night they went away. 3 or 4 days later, the Spaniards resolved to give us battle there. They entered by the road called Cuauhecatitlan, which goes straight toward where salt is sold. So many Indians and Spaniards went along that they did not fit on the road, because there was water on both sides, and they threw in earth, adobes, and timber in order to pass better. When they had widened the road, they began to enter along it in battle order, with their banner ahead, playing the fife and drum, and behind them came all the Indians of Tlaxcala and of the other friendly towns. The Spaniards entered with much show of contempt for the Mexicans, and the Tlaxcalans and other Indian friends went along singing. The Mexicans too sang in the same manner as they used to in war. When they reached a district called Tlatelolco, which is now San Martin, the Tlatelolcan soldiers were hidden, and crouched down for fear of the artillery, awaiting the battle and the shout of their captains ordering them into the fight. And when they heard the command, the Tlatelolcan captain named Tlapanacatl rushed at the Spaniards and began to cry out, urging on his followers. He came to grips with a Spaniard and knocked him to the ground, and the other soldiers who were with his Tlapanacatl took him prisoner. Chapter 35 of how the Mexicans captured more Spaniards, more than 53, and many Tlaxcalans, Texcocans, Chalca, and Xochimilca, and killed them all before the idols. A very fierce battle was joined that day, so that the Mexicans, as if drunk, hurled themselves against the enemy. They captured many of the Tlaxcalans, Chalca, and Texcocans, and killed many of them. And fighting, they made the Spaniards and all their Indian friends leap into the canals. With all this, the road became so muddy that they could not walk on it. Here they captured many Spaniards and dragged them away. In this place where the church of San Martin now is, they took a banner from the Spaniards. The Spaniards fled, and they pursued them as far as the district they call Colhuacatonco, where they took refuge. The Indians went back to gather the field of battle. They took their captives and put them in procession, all with their hands bound. They placed the Spaniards in front, then the Tlaxcalans, then the other captive Indians. Taking them to the temple, Siu, they called Momosco, they killed them there one by one, taking out their hearts. First they killed the Spaniards, then all their Indian friends. Having killed them, they set their heads on poles before the idols, all pierced through the temples, those of the Spaniards highest, those of the Indians lower, and those of the horses lower still. 53 Spaniards and 4 horses died in this battle. In all this time the war did not cease on the water. On both sides they killed one another in the canoes. There was great hunger among the Mexicans and much sickness, because they drank water from the lake and ate vermin, lizards, mice, and so on, since no provisions reached them. And bit by bit the Spaniards went corralling the Mexicans, surrounding them on all sides. Chapter 36 of the first time the Spaniards entered the marketplace, Tianquis of Tlatelolco. With the war going, as said above, one day 4 horsemen entered the marketplace of Tlatelolco and made a circuit all around it, lancing everyone they came upon, and they killed many Mexican soldiers. After going around once, they crossed the middle of the marketplace, and then left, fleeing, and many soldiers ran after them, shooting at them. This entry of theirs was sudden, and no one had thought they would dare enter. That same day they set fire to the principal temple, Chiu, which was Huitzilopochtli's, and it burned completely in the space of about 2 or 3 hours. When the Mexicans saw the temple burning, they began to weep bitterly, for they took it as an evil omen to see the temple burned. Then a very fierce battle was joined, lasting almost a day. With the artillery, the Spaniards knocked down some large walls or barricades from which the Mexicans were giving them battle, and after they were knocked down, the Mexicans took refuge in the houses that surrounded the marketplace. The Mexican soldiers climbed up onto the rooftop terraces of these houses, and from there shot arrows and threw stones. And the Mexicans made holes in those houses and used them as shelters to protect themselves from the horses. Another time the Spaniards and the Indian friends came into the marketplace and began to seize and capture Indians. When the Mexican soldiers saw this, they went out after them and made them abandon their prey. Here died an outstanding captain of the Mexicans, named Axoquentzin. Then the Spaniards who were fighting on the side of San Martin withdrew, although on other sides the Spaniards and their friends still fought. A company of Mexican soldiers set an ambush to catch the Spaniards and their friends off guard, and to fall upon them as they passed by. But some soldiers from Tlaxcala, who were helping the Spaniards, climbed up onto the rooftop terraces and saw the ambush, and cried out to the others to come and fight those who lay in ambush. When those in the ambush saw that they had been discovered, they fled, and so the Spaniards passed that narrow place safely to go to their quarters. Having fought all day, the Spaniards went back without breaking their enemies that day, because the Mexicans had removed the bridges so that they could not get at the enemy. Chapter 37 of how by night the Mexicans opened the water roads that the Spaniards closed by day. By day the Spaniards and their friends filled in the canals in order to reach where the enemy was, but by night the Mexican enemies opened up and dug out again everything they had filled in during the day. They were at this for several days, and for this reason the victory was long delayed. On land the Spaniards and the Tlaxcalans fought, some in the area called Yacacolco, others in the area called Tlatelolco, and others in the area called Atezcapan. And on the water fought those of Xochimilco, Cuitlahuac, Mizquich, Colhuacan, and Iztapalapan. The Tlatelolcans of the districts of Atlitzeuyan and Ijacac resisted on the water, and never rested from the battle. The arrows and darts were so thick that the whole sky seemed yellow. The captains of the Mexicans, one named Xucoscatzin, another Quaquautzin, another Tezcatlipoca, another Tecpanecatl, another Huitzitzin, and another Itzcuintzin, all of the district of Yacacolco, defended the entryways so that the enemy should not come in where the women and children had taken refuge, and fighting with great perseverance, they made the aforesaid Spaniards retreat toward another canal called Amaxac. Again the Spaniards attacked and reached a place called Ayacac, where there was a large house called a Telpochcali, young men's house. They set fire to the house. One of the Spaniards' Brigantines was going through the district called Tlatelolco, with many canoes of the friends following it. A Mexican captain named Catapult, who wore insignia that were half an eagle and half a jaguar, came in a canoe toward the place called Tlatelolco, with many canoes full of armed men following him. Then he began to shout to his followers to begin to fight, and the battle began, and the Spaniards withdrew. This captain and his followers pursued them, and the Spaniards withdrew toward a place called Atlitzeuyan, and the Brigantines also withdrew toward the lake. In this pursuit many Xochimilca died. Another time the Spaniards returned and shut themselves up in a temple, called Momostli, and again the Mexicans turned and pursued the Spaniards to where the Telpochcali was, at the place called Atlechuyan. The Spaniards again turned on the Indians with Coyohuehuetzin at the canal. A Mexican captain named Itzpapalotzin and Otomi in rank turned and made the Spaniards retreat to the Brigantines. Then the battle ceased. The people of the town of Cuitlahuac, thinking that their lord named Mayahuatzin was dead along with the rest, grew very angry with the Mexicans among whom their lord was, and said, "Why have you killed our lord?" When their lord, who was alive, learned that his vassals were angry, he spoke to the captain Coyohuehuetzin, saying, "My lord brother, seek out one of your valiant soldiers who has a strong voice." Coyohuehuetzin summoned a captain named Tlamayocatl, and the lord of Cuitlahuac told him, "Go and tell my vassals that I send you to tell them I am alive, and that they should look this way and they will see me." When that captain spoke to the people of Cuitlahuac and told them what the Lord Mayahuatzin had ordered, they would not believe him, but said that they had killed him, and that what he told them was not true. The other answered, "He is not dead, as you think. Look, and you will see him where he is, alive. For he placed himself there so that you would see him." And the Lord of Cuitlahuac spoke and said, "See that you lose none of my adornments, jewels, and insignia, for I am alive." When the lord of Cuitlahuac had said these words, the Indian friends of the Spaniards began to shout and to fight against the Mexicans, and drove them inside the marketplace where the copal is sold, and there the battle went on for a long while. Again our enemies took counsel to attack and destroy us, especially the Epidemic of Tlaxcala, along with many other captains. They resolved to enter by a street that was next to where San Martin now is, and the street went straight to the house of a Tlatelolcan noble named Tlacatzin. Then the Tlatelolcans went out to meet them, a captain named Tlapanacatl going ahead, and those who went with him hurled themselves at the enemy with great fury. And the captain named Tlapanacatl was captured and was being carried off prisoner, but he escaped with a wound in a leg, and the fighting stopped for the time being. Chapter 38. Of how the Spaniards set up a wooden machine like a sling or catapult to hurl stones at the Mexicans, and of an omen that appeared. When the Spaniards saw how much trouble it cost them to take the Mexicans, who had fortified themselves in the district of Amixac, they took counsel to build a machine of wood, a kind of sling or engine, with which to hurl stones and kill those who were gathered there, so that they would surrender. They built this machine in the marketplace of Tlatelolco, upon that round platform made of stone and lime, where they used to set up the wooden framework, on which they placed the men to be slain with arrows, the gladiatorial stone. There they raised the machine, which had a great beam standing upright, and at the top of it a sling. When they had it ready, and had loaded it with a great stone to hurl at the people, they wound it up and pulled it back. But when they loosed it, the stone did not go toward the enemy as they intended, but flew backward over the marketplace itself. Seeing this, the Mexicans, who were watching from a distance, were amazed and understood that the machine was of no use, and took heart. And the Spaniards, seeing that it did not serve, dismantled it. While these things were going on, the Mexicans, who were now hard pressed by hunger and by war, and who saw so many omens against them, sent to consult with a great captain named Tlacotzin, and with the others, whether they should surrender. And there was among them a great Quetzal owl, Quetzaltecolotl, that is, a warrior arrayed in the feathered insignia of an owl, with the device that had belonged to the Lord Huitzilopochtli. The captains resolved to send this Quetzal owl, warrior against the enemy, carrying with him certain arrows of great virtue, which were the darts of Huitzilopochtli. For they said that if this warrior struck the enemy with them, or if the omens were favorable, it would be a sign that they were still to have some good fortune in the war, but if not, they should take it as a sign of their ruin. They armed this warrior with the feathered insignia, and gave him the darts and sent him out. When the enemy saw him, they were greatly afraid, for he seemed to them a very tall and fearsome thing. They pursued him, and he fled and fell. But he rose again, gathered up some of the enemy's arrows and his own, and made his way back. The Mexicans could not tell whether what he had done was a good sign or a bad one, and their hearts failed them. That night nothing was seen, nor did anyone come out, and the next day nothing at all happened, and no one spoke, and the people simply remained crouching in their houses, and the Spaniards also did nothing, but remained still, watching to see whether the Mexicans would send anyone to sue for peace. Here the Spanish column gives the names of many of the Mexican and Tlatelolcan captains who fought in this war. On the Mexican side, Xoyetzin, Timochtzin, and the Tzilicatzin already named, and on the Tlatelolcan side a long roster of lords and valiant men. The Nahuatl column lists them in fuller detail, together with the districts they defended. Chapter 39. Of how the Tlatelolcans, when they were surrounded, saw a blood-colored fire come upon them from the sky. The next day, near midnight, it was drizzling, and suddenly out of nowhere, the Mexicans saw a fire, like a whirlwind, that threw off large and small coals, and many sparks, whirling, flashing, and crackling. It went around the fence or enclosure of the Mexicans, where they were all surrounded, at a place called Coyonacasco, and when it had circled the enclosure, it shot straight toward the middle of the lake, and there it disappeared. The Mexicans did not cry out, as they usually do at such visions. They all kept quiet for fear of the enemy. The day after this, they did not fight. They all stayed in their camps. Don Hernando Cortes climbed up onto the rooftop terrace of a house in the district of Massacre. This house belonged to a Tlatelolcan leader named Aztahuatzin. From that terrace he looked toward the enclosure of the enemy. There on top of the terrace they had set up for him a red canopy, from which he looked out, and many Spaniards were around him speaking with one another. It is very likely that Captain Don Hernando Cortes had sent many messengers to the Lord of Mexico, Cuauhtémoc, that they should surrender before they were all killed, since they had no remedy left. And at this point in the course of the war, it is very certain that the Lord of Mexico, Cuauhtémoc, had already given his word to the messengers of Captain Don Hernando Cortes that he wished to surrender. And it was for this purpose that the captain placed himself under the canopy on the terrace, waiting for the Lord of Mexico, Cuauhtémoc, to come into his presence with the other leaders, to place himself in his hands. And so, with Don Hernando Cortes on the terrace under his canopy, the Lord of Mexico, Cuauhtémoc, with all the leaders who were with him, came in canoes to where the Marquez was. Cuauhtémoc went in a canoe. 2 pages went with him, bearing their arms, and a single one went paddling the canoe named Nahuatl. And when they were taking him to the presence of Captain Don Hernando Cortes, all the Mexican people who were in the enclosure began to lament, saying, "Now our Lord King goes to place himself in the hands of the Spanish gods." Author's note by Sahagún. From the things said above, it appears clearly how much Captain Don Hernando Cortes temporized and overlooked things with these Mexicans, so as not to destroy them entirely, nor finish killing them all. For according to what is said above, many times they could have finished destroying them, and he did not do it, always waiting for them to surrender, so that they would not be completely destroyed. Chapter 40. Of how the Tlatelolcans surrendered to the Spaniards along with the Mexicans and their lord who was with them. When the Lord of Mexico, Cuauhtémoc, and those who went with him reached land, they disembarked near the house where the captain was, and the Spaniards who were near the water took Cuauhtémoc by the hand in a friendly way and led him to where Captain Don Hernando Cortes was, on the rooftop terrace. When he came to where the captain was, the captain embraced the said Cuauhtémoc and showed him many signs of affection, and all the Spaniards were gazing at him with great joy. Then they discharged all the guns in rejoicing at the conclusion of the war. When this happened, 2 canoes full of Mexicans appeared and entered the house of a leader named Catapult, where the Tlaxcalan Indians were, and they got into an altercation with one another, and some people were killed there, and the Mexicans fled and hid. After this had been done, Captain Don Hernando Cortes ordered it proclaimed that all who were in the enclosure should come out freely and go to their homes. When the Mexicans began to come out, they carried their weapons and went in gangs, and wherever they met any Indians who were friends of the Spaniards, they killed them. At this the Spaniards became very angry, and along with those who were leaving, some of the very citizens of Tlatelolco abandoned their houses and went away, thinking that they would be killed if they stayed in their houses. Some went toward Tacuba, others toward San Cristobal, and those who had their houses in the water, some left in canoes, others wading through the water, others swimming, and they carried their belongings and their children on their backs, many left by night, others by day. The Spaniards and their friends stationed themselves on all the roads and robbed those who passed by, taking the gold they carried and scrutinizing all their goods and all their clothing. And they took nothing but the gold and the women who were young and beautiful. In order to escape, some of the women disguised themselves, putting mud on their faces and dressing in rags. The Spaniards also took youths and strong men for slaves, calling them Tlamacasque, and many of them they branded on the face. The Mexicans surrendered and the war ended, in the year count called 3 House, and in the day count on the sign called Teocalhueyacan, 1 serpent. The same day that the Lord of Mexico, Cuauhtémoc, surrendered, they took him with all the leaders to the place Acachinanco, where the lodging of Don Hernando Cortes was. Then the next day many Spaniards came to Tlatelolco, all in order and ready for battle, and they all covered their noses because of the stench of the dead who lay unburied. They brought with them the Lord of Mexico, Cuauhtemoc-tzin, and another leader named Coanacoch-tzin, and another named Tetlepanquetzatzin, and the other leaders who guarded the treasure. They went straight to where the enclosure was in which the Mexicans had fortified themselves, called Tactzinco, and entered the house of the Tlacochcalcatl, who was named Coyohuehuetzin. Then they went up onto the rooftop terrace and sat down, and they set up a canopy there for Captain Don Hernando Cortes, and he sat down in his chair. The Indian woman who was interpreter, named Marina, placed herself near the captain, and on the other side was the Lord of Mexico, Cuauhtemoc-tzin, covered with a cloak called Huitzilopochtli. Next to him was the Lord of Texcoco, named Coanacoch-tzin, covered with a cloak of maguey called Xochiteno. There, too, was another leader named Tetlepanquetzatzin, Lord of Tacuba, covered with another poor and dirty cloak. There, too, was another leader named Mixcoatlilotlactzin, and another named Ahuelitoxin, and last of all was another leader named Yopicatl Papacatzin. On the other side were some Mexican Tenochca leaders, one named Tlacotzin, another Petlautzin, another Motelchiutzin, another Mexicatl, another Achcautli, another Tuctlamacasqui, another Coatzin Tlatlati, and another Tlatelolco. Chapter 41. Of the speech that Captain Don Hernando Cortes made to the lords of Mexico, Texcoco, and Tacuba after the victory, seeking the gold that had been lost when they left Mexico fleeing. When the 3 lords of Mexico, Texcoco, and Tacuba were gathered with their leading men before Don Hernando Cortes, he ordered Marina to ask them where the gold was that he had left in Mexico. Then the Mexicans brought out for him all the jewels they had hidden away in a full canoe, and set it all before the captain and the Spaniards who were with him. When he saw it, he said, "Is there no more gold than this in Mexico? Bring it all out, for all of it is needed." Then a leading man named Tlacotzin spoke to Marina in answer. "Tell our Lord and God that when he first came to the royal houses, he saw all there was, and we closed all the halls with adobe bricks. We do not know what became of the gold that was there. We believe that they, the Spaniards, carried it all off, and we have no more than this now." The captain replied, saying, "It is true that we took it all, but they took it all from us at that crossing of the canal called Teocalhueyacan. It is necessary that it appear at once." Then a Mexican leader named Cihuacoatl answered and said to Marina, "Tell the god and captain that we Mexicans do not fight upon the water with canoes, nor do we know this manner of fighting. Only those of Tlatelolco, who fought upon the water, cut off our lords the Spaniards, and we believe that they alone took it." Then Cuauhtemoc-tzin answered and said to the leader Cihuacoatl, "What is this you say? Even though it is so, that those of Tlatelolco took it, for that they were arrested, and they returned it all. It was all gathered together in the place called Texopan, and this is what is here. There is no more." Then Marina said, "Our captain says that it is not all here." And the leader Cihuacoatl answered, "Perhaps some commoner has taken something. It will be searched for and brought into the presence of the captain." On the following folio, the Spanish column is left blank, and the exchange continues in the Nahuatl column only. There Marina replies that the captain says 200 pieces of gold of a certain size must be produced. She measures a circle with her hands, and the Cihuacoatl answers that perhaps some woman has hidden it in her skirt, and that it will be sought out. Again Marina said, "The Lord Captain says that you are to look for 200 small discs of gold as large as this." And she showed with her hands the size of the paten of a chalice. Again the leader Cihuacoatl spoke and said, "Perhaps some of the women carried it off, hidden beneath their skirts. It will be searched for and brought into the presence of the Lord Captain." Then another leader there, named Mixcoatlilotlach Ahuelitoxin, spoke up and said, "Tell the Lord Captain that when Moctezuma was alive, the custom that was kept in making conquests was this: the Mexicans and the Texcocans and those of Tacuba and those of the Chinampas all went together against the town or province they wished to conquer, and after they had conquered it, they returned at once to their houses and their towns. Afterward, the lords of the towns that had been conquered would come and bring their tribute of gold and of precious stones and of rich plumage, and they gave it all to Moctezuma. All the gold came into his keeping. Here Book 12 ends. In the Nahuatl column, the Lord's account continues a little further, explaining that the tribute of the whole empire had always been gathered into Tenochtitlan and kept there, their way of saying that whatever gold the Spaniards had seized was the accumulated, wealth of many peoples now lost. Sahagun's Spanish closes the book at this point.